Go. Good morning. Welcome to the December 8th meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. I'm Ron Anderson, the co-chair of the HRA. Mayor Hovland is traveling and not available this morning. Before we begin, there are a few items to consider. Today, community comment will be the only opportunity during the meeting for members of the public to participate. You are allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes about anything that is not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. If you'd like to call in for community comment, please call 786-496-5601 with conference number, the PIN number, 221053#. We ask that individuals do not repeat information already presented. Call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward. Thanks in advance for your patience as we work to conduct this meeting virtually. We hope there will not be any issues, but be assured that we will do our best to continue the meeting as best we can if there are any glitches. Ms. Olson, I wonder if you could call roll, please.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Commissioner Pierce.
Here.
Vice Chair Anderson.
Here. If you care to join us, the HRA will speak the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Brings us to our meeting agenda. We have one here, and I wonder if there are any commissioners present who would suggest any changes to the meeting agenda. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to approve it.
So moved. Second.
Commissioner Pierce moves. Commissioner Jackson seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. That brings us to community comment. I wonder if there are any present here who have a comment to make at this time. Having no one come forward, I'm wondering, Director Benarat, if there's anyone on the line.
I do not have anyone on the line yet this morning. Because there is a delay in the broadcast, I would recommend we wait 1 minute to make sure that anyone who might want to call in has an opportunity to do so. My clock shows that it's 7:37, so I'll come back to you at 7:38 or when I have a caller, whichever is first.
Thank you.
I still don't have any callers, so I think it's safe for you to move forward with the agenda.
Thank you. Thank you very much. While I don't recall any comments from our last HRA meeting, the Executive Director may have comments from anything he may have heard or since then.
There were no comments at our last HRA meeting.
Thank you. Then we have a consent agenda this morning. There are items on the consent agenda which are considered routine. Is there any commissioner who would like to remove anything from consent? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Commissioner Jackson moves. Commissioner Staunton second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Which brings us to the meat of the day. This brings us to reports and recommendations. And first up, I believe this is Director Hawkinson's, and this regards the approval of a redevelopment agreement for multifamily housing at 4260 West 76th. With us this morning, I should mention, as we consider this, is Nick Anhut from Ehlers, the city's financial consultant, Jay Lindgren, who is our city's legal counsel on this matter, And from Solom Development, I believe, is Mr. Gunsberry is here, I believe. Okay, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I want to add some context to today's discussion. On November 1st, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis published a statement. The increasing cost of housing, driven by too little housing supply relative to housing demand, threatens the vibrancy of the Twin Cities economy. So today's request. In Edina, we have been diligent and thoughtfully addressing the housing shortage by approving housing developments. Today I'm bringing forth another. Solom Companies are proposing Phase 2 development adjacent to the Fred that is under construction. I am seeking approval of the redevelopment agreement with Solom. Due to extraordinary soil conditions, including high water table, development challenges, the creation of various public access routes to Fred Richards Park, and the inclusion of affordable housing units that are seeking a financial gap that will between what they can raise through equity and bank financing and what it costs to construct. They need financial assistance from the city to make this development a reality. Staff, with the aid of our consultants, determined that the source of gap financing could come from Spark and pooled TIF funds from the Pentagon Park area. Currently, we are looking at an underutilized site. There's a 60 Eras office building and a surface parking lot. It is right adjacent and south of the Fred Richards Park. It's within the greater Southdale area in the Pentagon Park Redevelopment District, and it is along a transit corridor. The proposal includes 276 new housing units, of which 28 will be affordable to households with incomes at or below 50% of the area median income, and 110 additional units will be rent restricted not to exceed 120% of area median income. Currently, however, with the pro forma and how they're anticipating it will move forward, is that a lot of the rents, 100% of the rents are at around below 100% of area median income. So even reaching 120 would be under extraordinary circumstances and what the market will bear. Then, in addition to the affordability of the housing generally, is the access to the Fred Richards Park. So the access points, and you've seen this before, is there would be a road with a public easement, and the easement has been negotiated and agreed upon. Then there would be a pedestrian path and bike paths that would lead from 77th on this, adjacent to the building to Fred Richards Park. So the source of funds. It has been thoroughly underwritten by our advisors from Ellers, Nick in particular, and Dorsey, Jay and Alex, and determined that pooled funds from the Pentagon Park TIF district are eligible sources, and this does meet the but-for test. And for general public, but-for means but for the use of these public funds, this development could not proceed and move forward. The pooled TIF funds is the increment from the development of the Fred and this project in itself. So the tax increment that's created by Phase 1 and Phase 2 that is pooled will be the source for this gap. It complies with the rationale for the overall TIF district, and it will not, the pooled amount used will not be in excess of 25% of that increment that's collected. So the terms of the TIF portion of this is a TIF note. It would be a $7.35 million TIF note, not to exceed 10% of the total development cost. There would be the easement and a declaration of restrictive covenants that will be recorded. There has to be evidence of qualifying costs, including the sustainability requirements. There's agreed upon cash-on-cash return of 7%. There's a 20-year term, 6% simple interest, semi-annual payments, and again, capped at the 25% of the pooled increment. The second source of funds would come from Spark. So in 2021, the state legislation enabled transfer of unobligated TIF increment to be assist private development. And we have pooled it together and created the Spark Fund. And this was adopted by the City Council in November of 2021. So up to $2 million of a forgivable loan of Spark would be allocated towards this development. And these would be to create the right-of-way from 77th to Fred Richards Park with the public easement. The terms would be that it's forgiven upon delivery of the loan agreement, delivery of the easement, and delivery of the improvements. So they would draw upon these funds during the construction period. Then when these are delivered, we would forgive that $2 million portion of the gap. So the estimated sources and uses, this is an $85 million development. We have thoroughly underwritten it, and based on other developments, it's really quite reasonably, the cost is fairly reasonable. It's $18,000 per door, which is a lot less than what we've seen on other housing developments. The green elements has a little over 1% of the total development cost, which is what we anticipated when we passed the policy, that there would be an upcharge, as it were, of about 1% of the total development cost. The developer fee is less than 4%, which is within market and industry standards. So we do not see any fluff really built into this budget. It's about $300,000 per unit of total development cost. So the costs all seem, we do not see anything extraordinary that is creating this increase in gap. A lot has to do with market conditions right now. So the eligible expenses for the TIF pooled funds, again, stormwater system, sustainability, soil conditions, site prep, the access road, and other fees that we have. The Spark funds is the pedestrian plaza, the monument signage, public access, plaza area stormwater system, and soil correction in the public areas. So we have separated out what the uses would be. So in summary, we hope to have site approval in spring, with construction commencing this summer. There's some wiggle room in here depending on when they get all their other financing, bids with contractors, getting the whole team set up. So there's some flexibility built into the redevelopment agreement, and completion around November of 2024. It has to, by state statute, meet the but-for test, with assistance coming from Pentagon Park TIF pooling, again, the 25% of that, and the Spark. And this is reiteration, the Spark will be reimbursed during construction and forgivable upon delivery of easement and certificate of completion. The pay-go note for the TIF pooled portion would be issued upon certificate of completion and verification of costs and market returns. So the TIF pay-go note, again, no new district is being created. This district already exists. So staff brought this to the Values Viewfinder team. We met as a large group to evaluate funding for this development and how it fit within the Values Viewfinder. And we have in your board packet the whole memo. There's some summaries of it here. With the benefits are fulfills the park master plan, delivers affordable units, complies with the climate action plan, better access to park, funding mechanisms to create that access, expands housing options. So there's a long list in the memo. There are, it's not all roses. There are some with every development. There's no grocery store that's really easily accessible, but that's not the developer's fault that there's no easily accessible grocery store nearby. But, when we're considering all the merits of a project, we need to make sure that people realize that there's going to be this opportunity for affordable and attainable housing broadly. the Southdale District, because that's where we are allowed density, there's concern about how all the children that live in these multifamily affordable housing units all get streamlined to one elementary school, but that is a combination of how the city is zoned with how the school districts are denoted, and we're in constant conversations with the school district regarding that, and migratory bird paths. So we looked at the pros and cons, and there are both, but we believe that the pros outweigh the cons. There are multiple public benefits to supporting this development. It adheres to the affordable housing policy with the addition of the 110 units of attainable housing, which are outside of the purview of the affordable housing policy. It complies with the comprehensive plan and the interrelationship between land use, transportation, housing options, and the Fred Richards Park Master Plan. So it kind of brings all various elements of plans together. It adheres to the sustainability policy and by using the National Green Building Standards at a silver level. It adheres to the Southdale Design Experience Guidelines. It provides the public access to the Fred Richards Park, and it has access to public transit and multimodal trails. So we believe that this location is pretty ideal for this type of development and increases the use that is there currently. So, thank you. That is my presentation.
Thank you, Director. It was very thorough. I wonder if there are any questions from the commissioners. Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had some questions posed to me about the access to the park. And it looks like it's going to be fully signed so that people going down 77th Street can see this is how you get into Fred Richards. So if you could just touch on a little bit about how public this access will feel once it's developed, and then who's responsible for maintaining that? Will it be built to city standards, and who's going to maintain it over time?
Chair, Commissioners, yes, there will be wayfinding signage. The signs will comply with the park standards, so it will, you'll be able to identify it, that it's access to a park. And the easement agreement is we will be in charge of the maintenance. We'll have a public easement over it, we'll plow it, we'll maintain it.
Okay, good, thank you. And the other one, I just wanted to have a comment that I'm really pleased that between the developer and you guys, we've got the bird safe attributes to this building because it is on a really large park. And so I'm pleased that the migratory birds will have the protection that we can give them. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anything? Commissioner Pierce.
Thank you. So I didn't have any questions. I just wanted to make a few comments. So very thorough presentation as usual. And I think that this is just another example of how challenging these projects can become to fund. There is work that we are doing to try and come up with a more sustainable model where we have access to more funds to be able to fund these types of projects. And so I think as we go forward and we see these projects come forward, it is what I would encourage people to do. It's great for us to say, yep, we've got an affordable housing development that we're going to be able to fund and move forward with. But if you look under the covers of how challenging it is, you'll start to understand why we do need to try to find additional, more sustainable ways of funding these projects and providing housing across the full life cycle as opposed to just in multifamily, right? It's a much broader issue, but I do, and I applaud you actually for doing the work with the tools you have in front of you, as well as thinking about what tools can we have in future to help expedite some of this. So nice work.
Good comments. Commissioner Staunton, anything? No. Thank you. For me, I'm pleased with the development here. And I think part of it is that the existing TIF district is actually partially funded by the developer's adjacent building. And so, in a sense, at least a portion of it is being paid by the developer and by his work. And I think that the Spark Fund loan of $2 million really creates the public access that we've been seeking. I remember Mr. Lindgren chatting with you just a few years ago about trying to determine how will we gain access to the park along 77th, and it appears that we found a way, and I think a superior way, to the nature of our discussion at that time. So any further comments or questions? Is there a motion to approve the development agreement for multifamily housing at 4620 West 77th?
So moved.
Commissioner Pierce moves, Commissioner Jackson seconds. Is there all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried, motion carried. Now, Ms. Hawkinson is still up, and we will now consider an amendment to our existing multifamily affordable housing policy.
I won't reread the quote from the Federal Reserve. We can use the quote for this as well. So today's request for changes is for 3 basic changes to the affordable housing policy. And for context, when the policy was passed, we talked about how it was a live document, that we were going to revisit it every year, we were going to continue to tweak it, address the market conditions, address the needs in the community, and that every year we may come up with some changes. So we didn't make any changes in the past year, so this is about 2 years of built up. So the fact that we are proposing some changes isn't a cause for concern that our policy was wrong or bad. It's that it's alive, and we just are constantly wanting to prove it. So there are 3 main components. One is to increase the buy-in fee to $175,000 per unit. Currently, it's at $125,000. And the policy currently states that we will offer a density bonus if they include affordable housing units. We don't have anything such as a density bonus. Our comprehensive plan allows for a range of density, and to go above the density allowed, we'd need a comp plan amendment, and I don't think that was the intention. So the idea is if you reach the maximum capacity within that range, then you have to include the affordable units. So it's the flip side of having the density bonus. And then I talked recently about the third element, although no action was taken, it was information only, is that we require cooperation with a third-party compliance officer. So a little bit of background information. We had this policy that was adopted in 2015. In 2018, the buy-in option was added, and that was to allow more flexibility with developers, as well as to help create an affordable housing fund. We added another change later in 2018 that to adhere to the policy, developers needed to affirmatively market available units, and they could not discriminate against people that had housing choice vouchers. We created the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in 2019, and then with the policy, we adjust the rents and incomes annually according to what the tables published by HUD and on MHFA's Minnesota Housing's website. So change 1, the buy-in fee. Currently, it is $125 per unit, and we increased that in March of 2021. And that was based in other communities. I'm proposing $175. As development costs increase, as rents increase, we did an analysis, and we realized that the cost to create an affordable unit over the 20-year affordability period is over $300,000. So doing a buy-in fee of $125 is kind of a deal. And so we're trying to close the incentive to do a buy-in rather than the inclusion. We're noticing with projects lately, there seems to be tilting more towards doing a buy-in than doing inclusion. And we don't know what the sweet spot is. We don't know where equilibrium is. We don't know if it's 300,000, if it's 200,000. So instead of making a great change, let's increase it to 175 and see what happens. It's still cheaper, quite honestly, for a developer to buy out, or buy in, rather than to include. But 175, if they're going to make that option, why don't we use the increased revenues to further affordable housing programs elsewhere? So it brings more money to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. As I stated, development costs we saw with Solem, it was $308,000 per unit to develop. And luxury, they exceed $500,000 per unit to develop. So even the 125 clearly does not replace the cost to develop in a unit. So yeah, as I indicated, it's about $325 is what it would cost if the difference in rent between market rate and affordable. Looking at a recent development, that is the differential of over time of what they're losing by not having the affordable unit. So we just really believe that the buy-in fee needs to increase. So we looked at projects that did inclusion versus buy-in. And you see the list. We had 118 units that were included due to the policy, and the buy-in was in lieu of 142 units. So we had buy-in for 142 units, inclusion of 118. So the tables have tipped. There's more buy-in than there is inclusion. Yet, at the same time, we have these goals that were approved by the City Council, that we pledged to the Met Council, that by 2030, we're going to have 1,804 new affordable units. We're making headway. We are. We approved, since the passage of the comprehensive plan, 341 affordable units, and that includes Solem. Overall, we're 18.9% there. So we want to keep the buy-in option. We think the buy-in is important. I know there are some that are opposed to it, but we think it's important because it allows us to do other programs. Our housing preservation program is funded through the buy-in. Our home rehab program is funded through the buy-in. So we're able to do those types of programs, but increase it. The buy-in allows a lot of flexibility. We have received about $8.5 million in buy-in, and there's that list of all the things that's supported. We had our training recently for 4D with property managers, and there was increased interest funded with these funds. So again, I just want to say we do believe that this option is important. It does allow that flexibility. The buy-in funds do go to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that allows for a variety of uses to help support the furtherance of affordable housing. I'm not going to read this. I know we have a time commitment, so but it's in the packet. It's in the trust fund ordinance. But there's a lot of uses that we can use with these funds. So the second option or change that I'm proposing is density bonuses. So in the comprehensive plan and guided land use, there are ranges of how many units can be built on an acre. For low-density residential, it's 1 to 5. For high-density residential, it's 12 to 60. Greater Southdale District, 50 to 100. So it's a pretty wide range, 50 to 100. And as I stated, right now, the policy says we offer a density bonus if they're going to include affordable housing. But currently, what's happening is a developer can come in and seek in Southdale area 100 units per acre and not have any affordability. So the idea of a density bonus is false. We want to change that. We want to say that if they are seeking in a mixed-use area 50% or greater of the maximum allowed units, that they need to include affordability. And for residential only, if they are seeking 75% or greater of a maximum allowed density, they need to include affordable units. Anything below that, they have a choice. Allow that choice. And clearly, ultimately, it's up to you all to decide whether or not you want a waiver on this policy. So nothing is written in concrete. So for example, if it's development is being proposed in an area that has 50 to 100 units per acre, and the proposal is 95 units per acre, so 90% of maximum, the development must include affordable units. If the density range is 50 to 100 and the proposal is 70, so it's 40% of maximum allowed within that range, they can do either. So how would this have played out in projects that we've already approved? So the Onyx bought in, and the project density is 53 units per acre. The comp plan allows for 75 units per acre, so it's 71% of density, and that's mixed use. They would have to include, and this, if we were to do this now, they would have to include affordable units, or have a really good justification for why they're not. All the other projects, they, like the Loden bought in as well, but they're at 33%. So they would have the choice. So the fact that they bought in, that's fine, according to this policy. And the other, 70th and France, they're at 31%. So the fact that they're buying in, according to this policy, is okay. So in residential projects, Hazelton Road, or I think it's the Bauer, the project density is 149 units per acre. The comp plan allows for 150. They're at 99%. They, according to the changes, we'd want them to include affordability. They bought in. The Millennium, they are including affordable units. They would have had the choice because they're at 63. The Edina Flats, they bought in. They're at 47. That's okay because with this change in the policy. So the third is cooperation, and I talked a lot about this, I think this summer, that we have had developers who gave a nod towards compliance to our affordable housing policy, but then when we wanted to check and confirm and verify that they were doing what they said they were going to do, we found out that they don't want to work with our compliance officer. They're like, no, you can't look at our records, you can't look at our files, and there's nothing you can do to make us comply. So we just want to say, no, we're serious about this policy, and we're going to look at you to make sure that you are doing what you say you're going to do. I mean, we tend to trust, we want to verify. So how does our policy, even with these, compare to our neighboring cities? When we first approved it, we're breaking ground. We're breaking new ground. We're kind of in the middle as far as being flexible towards developers. Eden Prairie recently passed their inclusionary zoning. Their affordability period is in perpetuity. Ours is 20 years. Ridgefield, 5 units is what triggers the policy. Ours is 20. So compared to some other cities, you know, if you combine it all, we're in the middle of the pack as far as flexibility. And we're probably fairly flexible. We create options for developers to choose. And I know that's a concern, that we don't want to muck too much with market forces, but in a way, that could be a role of government. When market does not provide what is needed by a community, government becomes involved. And so we're tweaking it a little bit more, this policy, to try to achieve the goals that we've stated. So we're not, even with these changes, the most extreme, the most rigid. I don't think these changes are going to cause developers to run away from Edina. And again, I don't know what the buy-in level is that would cause them to give pause. We haven't reached it. I don't know where it is. We just need to constantly push towards it. We have affordable housing throughout the city, but clearly the mass new development for where density is going to be an issue and put into question is primarily in the southeast quadrant. But we do have affordability. Through our policies, through the actions you all have taken, affordability is spread throughout the city. That's the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you, Director. That was a lot of information and very well prepared. So I thank you for that. A lot of work went into that. I wonder if there are any questions from commissioners. Commissioner Staunton.
Thanks, Stephanie. Great presentation, great evolution of this program. My question is about the inclusion element. Under our current policy, it's up to the council as to whether you can buy in or not, isn't it?
Chair, Commissioners, it's always council or HRA final decision. I mean, you approve it. We share it with developers if they are proposing something more than 20 units. You know, we say you need to comply with this policy, but we tend to have them decide whether or not they're going to opt for buy-in or inclusion, and then we present that to the City Council and the HRA, and you can opine at that time. I don't know how many times it's been brought into question. I think it's been raised. Why are you buying in? Why are you not? And then the developer has given their justification, so I don't know if it's ever been pushed and the decision has changed.
So is the notion of adding this requirement to create a different dynamic in that, or is it are we trying to drive more inclusion? And
Chair, Commissioners, yes, we're trying to drive more inclusion, and we're trying to raise the transparency of what is occurring. If someone is reaching maximum density and they're still opting to buy in, clearly it's the council's decision on whether or not they're going to approve that, but the developer will have to better articulate their justification for why they're not including. Right now, there's not as much of a dialogue on why. I mean, it's a higher litmus test and a higher standard. Ultimately, you decide, but it will bring it to light that you are asking for maximum density and you are not including affordable units. I want to know why.
all right, so it's designed to create a presumption, and then if they can make a case as to why it makes more sense to do a buy-in, we could still permit that.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellent work. I think you brought before us this dilemma that we can't do the density bonus, and I think you've worked long and hard on coming up with this, and it's a very clear and elegant solution, so I want to thank you for that. As you're presenting, it seems to me that this would be a really good presentation to share with the Planning Commission, and I hope that you can get on their agenda to just go through this presentation with them, because I think, as I said, this is much clearer, and it helps the decision process for us and for them as well. And I'm really proud of making policy clear. It's a big priority, and I just applaud you and ask you to share that with them. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Pierce.
Thank you. One question, if you could go back to 16, slide 16. I think I missed the definition or the intent of the trigger. I'm on a different slide. So the city comparisons. that slide. There you go. So can you just, explain that again?
Sure, Chair Commissioners. Our policy kicks in if a developer comes forth with a housing proposal that is 20 or more units. So Edina Flats was fewer than 20 units, so they did not need to comply with this policy.
Okay, thank you. So when I think about affordable housing, when we were doing the race and equity work, and so this is just a personal reflection, that was back in 2018, and the way I internalized our policy, I actually thought that having the buy-in, we wanted to eliminate it, actually. And so we kind of felt similar even about inclusion. But the more that I've learned about how our processes and policies work, I think that a lot of the things that we do are punitive, right? We kind of frame it in that way. So if developer, if you're having 50 units, then we're going to require you to include, right? If you want these TIF dollars for your development, then you have to buy in, right? And so I think what I have come to believe is that we do need to find a way to kind of flip that. And to Member Staunton's questions, I think it is a more powerful position for us to be thinking about. As a city, we have affordable housing goal, and we have a couple of vehicles to get that done. And then we decide, developer, we actually want you to do the buy-in because we have this fund over here that we want to take your $3 million to actually fund affordable housing that's someplace else in the life cycle. Maybe we don't want more apartments. Maybe we need a few more condos, or maybe we want some single-family homes, right? And so in that scenario, it feels like we're in the driver's seat to tell the developer, yeah, we have our affordable housing goals, and we want to use your funds here. So we don't want you to include. We want to take your buy-in, and we're going to use it more effectively here because we know better about our city where we want affordable housing. And I think the same about inclusion as well. If we are, as we track towards our goals, I think we have to find a way that we're always in the driver's seat, and it's not viewed as being punitive, it's all constructive. And I think that will help us really start to drive towards our goals. But the challenge is that one of the big challenges, actually, I think, is having a sizable pool, sizable funds that we can actually utilize to make that happen. So that is one thing that I would articulate. In many cases, I would like to see us continue, and I know we're doing this work, to continue to push towards whatever vehicles we have, whether it's inclusion or the buy-in, that we are deciding how to best use those funds, but across the entire life cycle, not just within a particular development.
Thank you. Does that generate any further thoughts or questions? Commissioner Staunton?
I want to follow up. I think that's really well stated, and I wonder if our policy shouldn't say that. You know, say that we need to decide whether we want to do buy-in or whether we want to do inclusion, depending on the facts and circumstances at the time. It may be something that we need because we've decided that we're on an initiative in single-family home environment, or that the fund is getting low and we need more resources to deal with our issues. I'm a little nervous about if we include it in the policy, those of us who aren't here in the future, might get the message that, the idea is to really have a presumption in favor of the inclusion. And I'm not sure we're going to want to do that in every case. So I'd like to see us modify that portion a little bit. But
Chair, Commissioners, may I add that Section 10, Section 9 talks about that the creation of affordable housing is a partnership between the city and the developers, so it uses that language. When it talks about incentives, and Section 10 says it is the strong preference of the city that each new qualifying development provide its proportional share of affordable housing on site. However, the city recognizes that it may not be economically feasible or practical in all circumstances to do so. And so I think there is language in there that allows for that iterative process between the elected officials and the developer to determine what would be best, both economic, to make sure the numbers pan out for the developer so they can move forward, as well as the city fulfilling goals, be it increasing the buy-in pool or increasing the number of units. So I believe that there is language contained within the policy that allows for that flexibility and that collaboration and iterative process.
And that's in the existing policy.
That's an existing policy. As such, the city reserves the right to waive this policy.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, maybe it's more in the messaging, because I do believe developers view some of this as I'm not quite sure how to word this, as a requirement, almost in the context of they get to choose. And while when you read through the policy, they actually don't necessarily get to choose in that way. It's not, but I feel like it would be just in the messaging for us to be in a position to more or less kind of dictate how we want these policies to live out. Like, that's our responsibility, and it's not, the developer doesn't get to read through the policy and then choose which one they want to do in order to comply. So I think it's probably more in the messaging than necessarily in the policy. So when they're going through the process of all the way back to planning and sketch plan review, going through the entire process, we can be clear about, we have goals. We're actually going to tell you how you're going to comply with this policy, because we've written it in a way to achieve our goals, and we're going to be more declarative on how we want you to comply. So it's probably more the messaging in the way I'm internalizing it. That helps.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Jackson.
So thank you. You've really prompted a lot of thoughts. One of the things that I heard Commissioner Pierce say is that we want to direct what our affordable housing looks like in Edina. And the idea that came to me is geography. And we don't want unintended consequences where all affordable housing is concentrated in one area. This is something that we'd like to see across the city. So as we move forward, it's a living document, I would like to see some consideration of how we take geography into account when we make decisions about how we're going to support and encourage affordable housing. Because I want to make sure that there was a kind of a little niggling thought in the back of my head going, wait a minute, what are the unintended consequences? And I think that geographic concentration might be one of them. So that would be something clear. We could tell developers, gosh, we've got an awful lot of units in this on this street, right? And we need to spread this out. That's part of the inclusion of having affordable housing in Edina. So we'll put that on your to-do list, but as we move forward, and I see Mr. Noondorf's here too, when we talk with developers about a project, we might ask them to consider what neighborhood it's going into so that we don't have it all concentrated. So future work to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? For me, it's the policy. The first portion of your policy change is really trying to find a sweet spot here, really, in terms of what you may call what I call the sweet spot, and we'll never know, as you mentioned, as we raise the buy-in level, the optional buy-in level. How do we determine what the number is or could be? And the only concern that I have about any of it is, at what point do we discourage development? Now, what we know is $125,000 does not discourage development, because we've had numerous people step forward and say, are you kidding me? This is a great deal. I'm in for this $125,000. What we don't know is it 150, is it 175, or is it 300? When we set an amount, at least today, it'd be awful hard to step back. Mm-hmm. That would be a difficult thing. It would be bad positioning, and also creates a level of uncertainty for developers as they come in. We should also, I think, recognize that at least in the near term, we may see fewer proposals based on interest rates, cost of construction, and what the environment overall is. Mm-hmm. And so what I worry about is do we changed the buy-in amount less than a year ago, about 9 months ago, in March of 2021. And so is this the appropriate amount? I don't have an objection to an amount. I just would like to know more or less what your thinking is in terms of that 175. How was that arrived at?
Oh, it was, Chair, Commissioners, it was arrived through lots of discussion. And when we worked with the Finance Department and looked at existing developments that did buy-in and did not buy in, and realizing that, it indicates that the cost over time is about $327,000. We knew that $327,000 of buy-in was extraordinary, and that we felt in our gut, without having empirical evidence, that was just too high. And we saw that 125 was too low. So it was notching it up. It was notching it up to see what the reaction is. Talked with the finance team, the Edina Housing Foundation, talked about this over numerous meetings, and that it's spaghetti on the wall, truthfully.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Executive Director.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, I can add a little bit of context to this. I was present when we did this for the very first time, and I can tell you that it was initially a negotiated number, right? It had a connection to development costs, but it was a negotiated number. And the context at the time for developers was we were getting complaints from developers because they had to pay a $5,000 per unit park fee, right? So setting this at $100,000 felt like a little bit of a risk that we may be doing something to the market that the market's never heard of, because we were the first city in Minnesota to do this, and still really the only city that collects anything in terms of real money from this charge. So our commitment at the time was, we think $100,000 is a lot, maybe it's close to what we need, but as we've continued to study it over time, this is what we are learning. We need to move it up a little bit.
So what I'm hearing in there is that you feel that the 175 number is a good place to arrive at this time.
At this time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. It seems as if that's
Chair.
engendering some further thinking. Commissioner Jackson.
I have to say, I don't really want to leave it on the record that we're doing this because we feel it's the right number. Do we have any data from cities outside of Minnesota on how this is doing? I really, I understand how we got there, and I understand this has been a negotiation, but I also know that that's not where I want to leave the discussion. Director
Yes,
Hawkinson.
and I misspoke. Truthfully, we did do we analyzed this. We looked at Bloomington. They have a buy-in fee, and how we compared to there, and we were lower. We looked at all sorts of cities, and I wish I had this in a previous presentation from last January. I have a table of looking at Boulder, Colorado, at looking at Burlington, Vermont, at looking at cities in South Carolina, at looking at cities in Illinois. We looked at multiple cities. When Reese was here, she did extensive research on looking at what buy-in fees were around, and ours was lower. And at the time, we felt like even though ours was lower than Bloomington, other cities didn't have it that were nearby, and so there was some hedging. But we have done some massive investigation, and some cities is lower than ours nationally, and some is far greater than ours. And I wish I did have that slide today. I do have that documentation on my computer. Because we looked at cities throughout the country.
But the truth is, it's not a very common fee yet. And so there's not good comparisons, as you even can see on this chart. There really aren't good comparisons for us to compare what our fee is compared to other cities in Minnesota. It's unique to particular markets in the United States that can really support this kind of charge.
Okay.
But we do have some data on what it costs per unit to build them, right?
Precisely.
And we're still shy of that.
We're extremely shy of that. Where we are, the current buy-in agreement in most instances is less than half of replacement cost, yes.
And it sounds like 175 is at least more than half of some.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to, we did look at data to make this decision. I would encourage us to see if there's an analysis we can do with the impact. And, if other cities have done that, when they instituted it, how it affected development and the creation of affordable houses. Because I think, this is a controversial tool that we have, and it was controversial when we adopted it, and it continues to have some strong emotions. I think it's turned out to be a very useful tool, and I'm in favor of this, but it would be nice to see whether there's any sort of follow-up analysis we can do about how it impacts the creation of affordable housing. So, thank you.
Or may I follow up here? Are you reluctant to entertain an motion on this proposal at this time, or are you considering further debate on this as that information comes to light?
I am strongly in favor of the proposal today.
Okay, thank you.
And I just think that as a body, we want to make sure that we have an evidentiary record coming into it, and then the ability to go back and see what are the effects of what our decision was.
Thank you
That's
for
all.
that clarification. Thank you. Any further question or comment? Is there a motion to approve the proposed amendments to the new multi-family affordable housing policy?
So moved.
Commissioner Jackson moves. Commissioner Pierce seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Which brings us to the potential of the executive director's comments this morning.
I have no comments this morning. Thank
Thank
you.
you. And commissioners' comments. I do have one, as a matter of fact. This is our last HRA meeting of 2022. And I want to, on a personal level, thank the commissioners for the learning opportunity that has been provided personally, but also to the community. I have continually been impressed by the high level of debate and the high level of intelligence brought to each topic that we've considered here over the course of the last year as an HRA. I just want to thank you again for that, because it denotes very strong good work. On that note, I would certainly entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Pierce seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.